And we find out today that that was just the very beginning of the law. And so today we get into a portion of the rest of the law that God gave Moses. And we might consider this civil law. This is how God wants his people to get along with each other. And there are also some laws for worship in there as well. But, you know, if you've ever had that thought, and I'm sure most of us, if not all of us, have had, what does God want for my life? What's God's will for my life? What does God want me to do in this situation? Well, another way to ask that question is to ask what's important to the Lord. You know, what's his priority? What's he consider to be the most important thing in this situation? And as we go through these Old Testament laws, now we don't live by these laws in the sense that, you know, we're under the Old Covenant and in Israel, but we do see here God's principles for how he orders things, what's important to him. And this instructs us about his character and about what godly living looks like. And so as we get to know him and his priorities, then we get the information that we need, the wisdom that we need to choose what's right in any given situation and to please the Lord with our actions. And so trust that this passage of scripture this morning will be very encouraging to all of us. Let's begin here in chapter 21, where God says to Moses, he says, "Now these are the judgments which you shall set before them. If you buy a Hebrew servant, he shall serve 6 years, and in the 7th he shall go free and pay nothing." So the first thing we read, as we read of laws that are governing the treatment of servants, and it's been well observed that the very first thing that God addresses in his law is the treatment of servants. And his people, they just came out of slavery. So this should be very important to them, right? Now, when we read the term slave, and we will read that term in our text, the treatment of slaves or servants, it's important to remember that we shouldn't think of this as slavery like the type of forced, brutal labor that Israel just escaped. Or like we think of slavery in modern times, like slavery in the South in the 19th century. What's described here in God's law is something different. And really God is establishing those differences on purpose so that what happened in Egypt does not ever happen in Israel. God's preventing that kind of system of abuse. What we read here is really it's an economic system. It's a way for people who fall into debt to pay off that debt or to work it off, okay? So it's kind of a form of bankruptcy almost. And the first thing that God does is he limits how long people can serve. He places a limit on how long they can serve to pay off their debt. No matter how big the debt is, they can only serve up to 6 years. And in the 7th year, they're to be set free with no obligations, okay? Now look, this is God's prevention, right, for economic enslavement. You couldn't just keep a person in indentured servitude forever. You know, we actually have a problem with this in our society, and I think it's called payday loans and car title loans. I'm serious. These kinds of loans that have extreme and excessive interest rates that people can never escape, and their debt just keeps climbing and climbing and climbing, right? And so this kind of excessive abuse, financial abuse, God prevents in his law here. He says they can only serve for a limited time. And so we see in this system, right, God, he protects the interests of the master, right, so that the debt gets repaid, but he also protects the rights of the servant so that they're not abused. And this system provides a way for them to pay off their debts and make things right. It gives them a way out. But it also regulates what can happen, and God shows mercy to those who fall into this condition by limiting how long they can serve. All right, verse 3. "Now if he comes in by himself, he shall go out by himself. If he comes in married, then his wife shall go out with him. If his master has given him a wife, and she has borne him sons or daughters, the wife and her children shall be her master's, and he shall go out by himself." So if the servant gets married while he's a servant, then the wife and the children are still in service to the master when he's finished with his 6 years. And before you think, man, that's kind of cruel, what's that about? Well, we should just understand, right? It's only 6 years. He doesn't have to get married. If he chooses to get married in that time, he understands what the arrangement is. But also, it's not like the wife and the children serve forever, right? Their service is limited as well. And then the servant has the option to redeem, to pay off the service of the wife and children so that they can be freed earlier, right? So these are the regulations that takes care of everybody's rights but balances them as well. Now, verse 5, but if the servant plainly says, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not go out free, then his master shall bring him to the judges. He shall also bring him to the door or to the doorpost, and his master shall pierce his ear with an awl, and he shall serve him forever. So when a guy's term of service is up, he can choose to voluntarily remain in service to his master for life. This is what we read of in the New Testament when Paul uses the term bond slave. Paul says, I am a bond slave to Christ. Because of the goodness of my master, I have chosen to surrender my life and serve him all the time. I belong to him. This is a voluntary attachment. And the way they marked it is they would pierce the ear. They would take you to the doorpost and they take an awl and they put the lobe of the ear in there and pop it, right? And that pierced ear was the symbol of a bond slave, of one who served out of choice. Now, this has there's a reflection here, a bigger picture here of Jesus for us. And that is in Psalm 40. This is so cool. In Psalm 40, we're told that Jesus was a bondslave. He was a willing servant to his Father and to his Father's plans and his Father's purposes. Prophetically, Psalm 40 speaks of Jesus, and it says here in verses 6 through 8, sacrifice and offering you did not desire. In other words, God didn't want sacrifice and offering from his Son. He says, my ears you have opened. That's the awl opening the ear, the piercing of the ear. My ears you have opened. Burnt offering and sin offering you did not require. Then I said, behold, I came in the scroll of the book. It is written of me. I delight to do your will, O my God, and your law is within my heart. It's just expressing the heart of Jesus toward his Father, and he willingly, Jesus in the incarnation, when he comes out of heaven and he becomes a man, you know that the incarnation is permanent? Jesus is a man forever. He's a man. He took on humanity for eternity so that he could be like us, so that he could make us like him. And this expresses that he did it willingly. I'm going to willingly give up my right and serve my Father and his purposes because of his goodness and out of love for him. Isn't that the most incredible picture? And then that's the model. That's the demonstration of our relationship to the Lord. Lord, you're good. I love you. Pierce the ear. I'm a willing servant attached to you forever for your purposes. All right, verse 7. Now, if a man sells his daughter to be a female slave, she shall not go out as the male slaves do. If she does not please her master, who has betrothed her to himself, then he shall let her be redeemed. He shall have no right to sell her to a foreign people, since he has dealt deceitfully with her. And if he has betrothed her to his son, he shall deal with her according to the custom of daughters. If he takes another wife, he shall not diminish her food or clothing and her marriage rights. And if he does not do these three for her, then she shall go out free without paying money. Now, we can read these Old Testament laws, and it kind of jars us, right? I mean, just the phrase, if a man sells his daughter to be a female slave, we're like, how horrible is that? Oh my goodness. But we're not really talking about, like I said, selling in slavery like we think of it in modern terms. This is really explaining an arrangement for marriage. That's what's happening here. If a man wants to give his daughter in marriage, right, there would be a bride price that was typically paid. The groom would pay the bride price. And so the idea is that he can give the daughter maybe before it's time for marriage, and she would serve and be part of that family until she's old enough to either marry the master or maybe he did this to arrange a marriage for his son. But the whole thing is here, the law protects the rights of the daughter and the young woman. And if something happens in the meantime and the marriage doesn't come to pass, well, then she can't be sold as any kind of regular servant or traded or any such thing like that. The man has to honor his obligations to her. If he took her in to be a wife for his son, then he has to treat her like his own daughter, and she has all the rights and privileges of a daughter in the household, right? If he takes another wife, he has to still provide for her and give her her share of everything. She's legally, economically protected in that arrangement. And so God is protecting the vulnerable here. Now look at verse 12. He who strikes a man so that he dies shall surely be put to death. Right? That makes sense. Thou shalt not murder. We read that in the Ten Commandments. However, if he did not lie in wait, but God delivered him into his hand, then I will appoint for you a place where he may flee. So this is the law governing what we would call in our society manslaughter, unintended killing. And in that day, the custom in all these ancient cultures was that if somebody killed another person, then the deceased close relative, male relative, had an obligation to avenge their life. And they would be responsible for bringing the other person to justice. And so in God's law, he says, look, but if it was an unintended thing, if it was something that happened without malice, unintentional, then I'll provide a place for the killer to escape where they can be protected. And we'll read more about this later, but they'll go to one of the cities of refuge, and there their case will go before the judges to find out if it really was unintended. But God provides protection for that. Verse 14, if a man acts with premeditation against his neighbor to kill him by treachery, you shall take him from my altar that he may die. What does that mean? Take him from my altar. Well, again, in ancient societies, places of worship, temples were seen as a place of refuge. And if you were under judgment to die, sometimes people would run to the temple. Like you're not going to kill me here. This is a safe place. But God says for his people, right, true justice is more important than religious ritual. And God says it doesn't matter if they run to the temple, but do what's right, do what's just. Verse 15, he who strikes his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. He who kidnaps a man and sells him, or if he is found in his hand, shall surely be put to death. So capital punishment for kidnapping, that's what we would think of as slavery like we know it, or think of it, when you kidnap someone and force them into a life of labor. So that's a capital crime. And then in verse 17, he who curses his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. So in 15, if you strike your father or mother, capital crime. If you curse your father or mother, a capital crime. And now we should understand that when we talk about striking and cursing, the idea is striking to kill, swearing vengeance against. Right? This is not a mild kind of family dispute. But you see how highly God regards this thing of honoring your father and your mother. That attempted murder, threats of murder against a father or a mother are considered a capital crime for which death is the punishment. And I just thought this was so excellent. I want to read a quote to you from a guy named David Guzik. When he speaks of this verse, he says, the law discouraging conflict between generations is important. Each elder generation, as they grow older, is at the mercy of the younger generation. If the younger generation is allowed to carry on open warfare with the older generation, the very foundations of society are shaken. And then he goes on to say, some modern laws, including developing laws regarding euthanasia, may lead to the easier murder of the older generation by the younger. See, God was all about protecting life. And we need to have the same principles. We need to have the same standards as believers today. Verse 18, if men contend with each other and one strikes the other with a stone or with his fist and he does not die, but is confined to his bed, if he rises again and walks about outside with his staff, then he who struck him shall be acquitted. He shall only pay for the loss of his time and shall provide for him to be thoroughly healed. So if two guys get in a fight, one ends up injured and can't work, then the other party has to pay for his lost time at work, right? Think about that in context of the Good Samaritan. Why was the Samaritan so good? Because it wasn't a fight. He was just attacked. And yet he showed the same goodness and kindness as if he had been at fault. Amazing. All right, verse 20. And if a man beats his male or female servant with a rod so that he dies under his hand, he shall surely be punished. Okay, that makes sense, right? He shall surely be punished. Notwithstanding, if he remains alive a day or two, he shall not be punished, for he is his property. Again, sometimes we read these Old Testament laws, we're like, wow, what's that about? Well, listen, a master did not have a right to kill his servant out of anger. Obviously, that's murder. But he did have the right of corporal punishment. Now, it's against his own interests to punish him severely so that he dies, right? Then he loses his servant. So he has a built-in motivator to restrain himself. But the law also recognizes that if the servant does something worthy of punishment and is punished, and there's an unintended consequence for that, then the loss of the slave is the punishment, right? So balancing, again, these rights of the master and the servant. Verse 22, if men fight and hurt a woman with child, so that she gives birth prematurely, yet no harm follows, he shall surely be punished accordingly as the woman's husband imposes on him, and he shall pay as the judges determine. But if any harm follows, then you shall give life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. So here we get protection for life in the womb. So we should take note of that, right? In our current fight against abortion and our current political situation around that issue. Now, God's law says if the baby was born prematurely because of injury to the mother and the husband presses charges, right, the guilty party would have to pay some kind of fine depending on what the judge says is fair. But if the baby was injured, if there was permanent harm, okay, then there should be a punishment that's equal to the crime. And then we get this statement, right? Life for life, limb for limb, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, burn for burn. And the thing about this, we're familiar with this phrase probably, an eye for an eye, an eye for an eye. This is something that became popular in Jesus' day, right? In Jesus' day, the people thought of this law as demanding that they execute justice against those who had done them wrong. It was like God was demanding retribution against harms done to you. Okay? Jesus corrected that. Jesus corrected that. Jesus said, I tell you not to resist an evil person. Whoever slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other to him also. He said, you've heard it was said, an eye for an eye. But Jesus says, I tell you not to resist an evil person. See, the Lord wanted us to be gracious in small things. He wanted us to absorb small offenses. He wanted us to show love in return for evil, right? But they misunderstood this principle because this principle, an eye for an eye, it's not demanding retribution, it's limiting retribution. Man doesn't need any help, right, getting others back for what they've done to him. We're good at that. We've got like a PhD in that. God's law is limiting retribution so that justice is, like we would say in our today, the punishment fits the crime, right? It should be appropriate for what's been done. And God limits man's anger and man's retribution here. It should be appropriate. All right, verse 26. If a man strikes the eye of his male or female servant and destroys it, he shall let him go free for the sake of the eye. If he knocks out the tooth of his male or female servant, he shall let them go free for the sake of his tooth. If an ox gores a man or a woman to death, then the ox shall surely be stoned, and its flesh shall not be eaten, but the owner of the ox shall be acquitted. If the ox tended to thrust with its horn in times past, and it has been made known to his owner, and he has not kept it confined, so that it has killed a man or woman, the ox shall be stoned, and its owner also shall be put to death. So, criminal negligence, there's punishment for that. You got a violent animal, and you let it just run about and it kills somebody, then you're responsible, right? If there is imposed on him a sum of money, then he shall pay to redeem his life whatever is imposed on him. So it would be possible for him to buy his life back, okay? Again, laws governing negligence. We're responsible, not just for our actions, but for the things that we oversee, the property that we have. We have a greater responsibility to society, to other people. Now, verse 31, whether it has gored a son or gored a daughter, according to the judgment, it shall be done to him. If the ox gores a male or female servant, he shall give to their master 30 shekels of silver, and the ox shall be stoned. So here, if the ox kills a servant, it was an automatic penalty, a set price for a servant, and it was 30 pieces of silver. And that should probably make us think of Jesus being betrayed. He was betrayed for the price of a servant because he took the lowest place, the humble place, to serve us. Verse 33, and if a man opens a pit, or if a man digs a pit and does not cover it, and an ox or a donkey falls in it, the owner of the pit shall make it good. He shall give money to their owner, but the dead animal shall be his. If one man's ox hurts another's, so that it dies, then they shall sell the live ox and divide the money from it, and the dead ox they shall also divide. So this, just fairness. This is how you fairly deal with these things. Or if it was known that the ox tended to thrust in time past, and its owner has not kept it confined, he shall surely pay ox for ox, and the dead animal shall be his own. All right, chapter 22. If a man steals an ox or a sheep and slaughters it or sells it, he shall restore 5 oxen for an ox and 4 sheep for an ox. So now we're going to get into some laws governing theft. And there's a steep penalty for theft, right? Which would naturally deter people from stealing cattle. And we also see in these laws that God is not just concerned with stopping the theft, but he's also concerned with restitution. You know, retribution is an act of vengeance against another person. But restitution, that's making something right. You know, God wants us to make things right. If we harm somebody else, he wants us to do whatever we can to make it right. And, you know, the law is limited. Our ability to do that is limited. We can't make it perfect. But we can do something to replace or restore whatever has been damaged or taken away. And God wants restitution. So we should do that. You know, when we sin against somebody, ask for forgiveness, but also see if there's a way to make it right. Verse 2, if the thief now is found breaking in and he is struck so that he dies, there shall be no guilt for his bloodshed. If the sun has risen on him, there shall be guilt for his bloodshed. So if a thief's breaking in and he's killed by the owner, as the owner tries to defend himself and the property, then that's okay. And this is tragic, but it's not a crime. But if the sun is risen, in other words, if the owner can see what's happening, then he's guilty of murder. Because you can't take a human life in defense of property in God's view. That's not a justifiable reason. It's just stuff. It's just stuff, right? Now, verse 4. If the theft is certainly found alive in his hand, this would be talking about the thief again. If the theft is found alive in his hand, whether it is an ox or a donkey or sheep, he shall restore double. So if he takes it and he slaughters it and eats it or sells it or whatever, then he owes 4 animals back or 5 animals back, depending on what it is. But if he can restore the original animal, then he only owes double. And I think that just means the original animal is valued more highly, right? The other ones that replace it may not be of the same quality or whatever, so a delineation here. Now, if a man causes a field or vineyard to be grazed and lets loose his animal and it feeds in another man's field, he shall make restitution from the best of his own field and the best of his own vineyard. If fire breaks out and catches in thorns so that stacked grain, standing grain, or the field is consumed, he who kindled the fire shall surely make restitution. I have a cotton field behind my house and I have a big burn pile, and I'm just waiting for that thing to get harvested because I dare not light that pile of wood until that farmer gets his crops in because I cannot afford that, right? Same laws that we have today. Verse 7, if a man delivers to his neighbor money or articles to keep, and it's stolen out of the man's house, if the thief is found, he shall pay double. If the thief is not found, then the master of the house shall be brought to the judges to see whether he has put his hand into his neighbor's goods. For any kind of trespass, whether it concerns an ox, a donkey, a sheep, clothing, any kind of lost thing which another claims to be his, the cause of both parties shall come before the judges, and whoever the judges condemn shall pay double to his neighbor. If a man delivers to his neighbor a donkey, an ox, a sheep, any animal to keep, and it dies, is hurt, or driven away, no one seeing it, then an oath of the Lord shall be between them both, that he has not put his hand into his neighbor's goods, and the owner of it shall accept that, and he shall not make it good. So in a case of theft and nobody knows what happened, the two parties go to the judges make a decision. But in the case of an animal running off, basically there's no witness. It's just one person's word against the other, right? This is really interesting. The solution to that problem was you're both going to take an oath before the Lord. And then the person who lost out is just going to have to trust the Lord with it. So if the other party is lying, then they have to lie to the Lord and they'll suffer his judgment. But if you're the one that lost out, you just have to trust that to God that he's going to take care of it. The law can only do so much. As human beings, we can only do so much to make sin right, to try to turn back the clock and make things good. The truth is we're never going to fix it all. We're never going to heal it. We're never going to make it perfect. And as people, we have to understand that. And we have to do what it says here. We have to trust that to the Lord. Okay, Lord, I suffered loss. Someone sinned against me. There's nothing I can do. There's really nothing they can do to make it right. Just think about those who lose loved ones, and it was a drunk driver or some other kind of thing. You can never get them back, right? And sure, a law firm might go get damages and might hit an insurance company, but at some point, we have to say, okay, Lord, I just have to trust it to you. I have to trust it to you. They had to do that in the Old Testament law as well. Verse 12, now it says, but in fact, if it is stolen from him, he shall make restitution to the owner of it. So if something comes out later and they discover the truth, then restitution has to be made. If it was torn by a beast, then he shall bring it as evidence, and he shall not make good what was torn. If a man borrows anything from his neighbor and it becomes injured or dies, the owner of it not being with it, he shall surely make it good. So if you borrow something, it's on you, right? If the owner was with it, he shall not make it good. It was hired, it came for its hire. Hey, bring your ox over here and help me in my field. And the owner is running his own animal, right? Then it's his responsibility. If a man, now we'll get into something else. If a man entices a virgin who is not betrothed and lies with her, he shall surely pay the bride price for her to be his wife. If her father utterly refuses to give her to him, he shall pay money according to the bride price of virgins. So this law protects young women and their families. And here the idea is not that the young lady was raped. All right, this wasn't an assault. The idea here is premarital sex. This is a mutual relationship. But it's against God's law. And so there's a consequence for this. And the consequence is, okay, if you want that relationship, then have it the right way. Right? Take her as your wife. Pay the bride price. And so obviously this would very much encourage godliness in sexual relations. But it's not required. If the father says, look, the guy's a jerk. And he's not a good man. I don't want to give my daughter to him. Then he could pay the bride price, pay what would normally be transacted for the marriage. Right? Now, verse 18. You shall not permit a sorceress to live. Whoever lies with an animal shall surely be put to death. He who sacrifices to any god except to the Lord only, he shall be utterly destroyed. So 3 cases here of capital punishment: sorcery, bestiality, and idolatry. And I believe these 3 laws are probably listed together, associated with each other, because in practice, they happen together. Sorcery, that would be, the idea here is like spells and witchcraft and that kind of thing. But the idea really is idol worship or pagan worship practices that involve some kind of mind-altering substance. So like in the New Testament, when it translates a word sorcery, it's really talking about drug use. That's how we would talk about it today. Inhaling something, eating something to alter your mental state. And this was a common thing used in pagan worship practices. Okay? So sorcery and then bestiality, right? Sex with animals and idolatry. These were all part of Canaanite pagan worship rites. And so God says each one, they're absolutely forbidden in Israel and deserve capital punishment. You shall neither mistreat a stranger nor oppress him, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. You shall not afflict any widow or fatherless child. If you afflict them in any way and they cry out at all to me, I will surely hear their cry, and my wrath will become hot, and I will kill you with the sword. Your wives shall be widows, and your children fatherless. God is serious about protecting vulnerable people. He does not want his people to take advantage of those who are in hard times, those who can't protect or provide for themselves. God says the punishment for that is me. I will become hot. And the idea here is he's going to let Israel's enemies roll over them and bring destruction to the nation, right? So there's a societal consequence for allowing this kind of behavior. Verse 25, if you lend money to any of my people who are poor among you, you shall not be like a moneylender to him. You shall not charge him interest. No interest on personal loans, God said, for his people. Now, this doesn't mean this is different than like a business loan. This is when you lend to somebody who's in need, a poor person, right? No interest, a strict prohibition on that. Verse 26, if you ever take your neighbor's garment as a pledge, in other words, I'll loan you the money, but you got to give me your coat so I know you're going to pay me back, right? Take the garment as a pledge. You shall return it to him before the sun goes down, for that is his only covering. It is his garment for his skin. What will he sleep in? And it will be that when he cries to me, I will hear, for I am gracious. When he's shivering in the cold that night and he calls out to the Lord says, I'm going to hear him. I love here how it just says, God says, I will hear, for I am gracious. God says, I am gracious. The law, God's law, is not only about equality and justice. God's law is not only about justice, it's also about doing what is right and honorable before him. And the Lord's gracious. And there are times when he calls us, guess what? To be gracious. Not to demand all our rights. In fact, that's the whole thing of following Jesus. He who takes up his cross, right, and follows me. Lay down your rights to yourself and follow after me. Verse 28, you shall not revile God, nor curse a ruler of your people. You shall not delay to offer the first of your ripe produce and your juices, the firstborn of your sons you shall give to me. We know that was a redeeming thing, not a sacrifice thing. Likewise, you shall do with your oxen and your sheep. It shall be with its mother 7 days, and on the 8th day you shall give it to me. And you shall be holy men to me. You shall not eat meat torn by beasts in the field. You shall throw it to the dogs. Chapter 23. You shall not circulate a false report. Do not put your hand with the wicked to be an unrighteous witness. You shall not follow a crowd to do evil, nor shall you testify in a dispute so as to turn aside after many to pervert justice. We would say today, you should tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And then also this idea of not following the crowd, right? Approval of the crowd is not the standard for right and wrong. God says we do what's right, regardless of the company that says otherwise. Verse 3, you shall not show partiality to a poor man in his dispute. If you meet your enemy's ox or his donkey going astray, you shall surely bring it back to him again. If you see the donkey of one who hates you lying under its burden, and you would refrain from helping it, you shall surely help him with it. God's law taught his people, he said, be a good person, right? Be a good person, even to those who aren't good people to you. Love your enemy. Do what's right. Why do we do this? Well, we're obligated to show this kind of honor toward other people, to show the love of God to others, not because of anything they have or have not done, but because we belong to the Lord and we represent him. Right? That's our obligation. That's our motivation for doing what's right, even to those who do us wrong. It's because we belong to the Lord. It's not about what happens to us. It's about how we live for him. Verse 6, you shall not pervert the judgment of your poor in his dispute. In other words, when making a judgment on an issue, you don't show partiality to a poor person, either to take advantage of him or to give him a break because he's poor. You just do what's right, right? Justice is blind. Keep yourself far from a false matter. Do not kill the innocent and righteous, for I will not justify the wicked. And you shall take no bribe, for a bribe blinds the discerning and perverts the words of the righteous. You shall not oppress a stranger, for you know the heart of a stranger, because you were strangers in the land of Egypt. 6 years you shall sow your land and gather in its produce. In the 7th year you shall let it rest and let it lie fallow, that the poor of your people may eat, and what they leave the beasts of the field may eat. In like manner you shall do with your vineyard and your olive grove. So we know God said every 7 days you're going to take a break. You're going to rest, the Sabbath, right? Every 7th year the slaves, the servants are going to go free. Well, here, every 7th year, we get another kind of a rest, and that is the land gets to rest, right? So they didn't deplete their soil. It was a good farming tactic. It was a practical thing. But also, God goes on to say, whatever naturally grows up in the field, from the previous year, whatever wheat comes up or whatever, he says, don't harvest that. Leave that for the poor. Let them harvest it. It was God's provision, an opportunity for them to go and to gather for their needs. Verse 12, 6 days you shall do your work, and on the 7th day you shall rest, that your ox and your donkey may rest, and the son of your female servant and the stranger may be refreshed. And in all that I have said to you, be circumspect, and make no mention of the name of other gods, nor let it be heard from your mouth. God says, don't flirt with other religions and other deities, right? Romans 16:19, the Apostle Paul tells us essentially the same thing. He says, be wise in what is good and simple concerning evil. Be wise in what is good, but simple concerning evil. It's enough to know that it's evil, right? We don't have to understand all its ins and outs, lest we get entangled in it. Verse 14, 3 times you shall keep a feast to me in the year. You shall keep the feast of unleavened bread. You shall eat unleavened bread 7 days, as I commanded you at the time appointed in the month of Abib, for in it you came out of Egypt. None shall appear before me empty. And the feast of harvest, the first fruits of your labors, which you have sown in the field, and the feast of ingathering, at the end of the year, when you have gathered in the fruit of your labors from the field. 3 times in the year, all your males shall appear before the Lord God. God was into rest. This is awesome. Take a day off every week. Right? And all these pictures of rest for the land, rest for the people. And then 3 times a year, he says, everybody's going to take a rest, and they're going to come and they're going to worship in Jerusalem. And these 3 feasts are essentially the Feast of Passover and unleavened bread, which are together. That celebrates their deliverance from Egypt. We've talked about that. The second feast is going to be the Feast of Weeks. It's the beginning of the wheat harvest. It's 50 days after Passover. And then at the end of the year, what will later become known as the Feast of Weeks or the Feast of Booths, at the harvest at the end of the year for the other crops, God says you're going to hold a feast to me. And then later that will be also a time to remember God sustaining them in the wilderness, in their wilderness wanderings. So 3 times a year, they're all to come together and to worship. It's so important for us. God knows, he made us. It's so important that we make time not just to rest, but time to worship. And we need those times weekly. We need those times in the year to be refreshed. And it's important that it's not just physical rest, right? But it's spiritual rest. It's time to be with the Lord and to be refreshed in the Lord. All right, verse 18, you shall not offer the blood of my sacrifice with leavened bread, nor shall the fat of my sacrifice remain until morning. This has to do with purity and with consecration, total consecration to the Lord. We'll see more about that in future chapters. Verse 19, the first of the first fruits of your land you shall bring into the house of the Lord your God. You shall not boil a young goat in its mother's milk. So if you ever go to a kosher restaurant, a Jewish kosher restaurant, and order a cheeseburger, at best, you're going to get a bad sneer, right? You might get thrown out. In the kosher diet, you don't mix dairy and protein together. And the reason is for this line in the Old Testament text: don't boil a goat in its mother's milk, which seems very bizarre to us and strange to us. So the rabbis at some point decided, you shouldn't mix the milk and the meat. That's the idea. Well, I think a better translation or understanding of this is to realize that this was part of an old Canaanite practice, a ritual where they would make this concoction by boiling the little goat in its mother's milk, and then they would take that concoction and sprinkle it over their fields and groves and vineyards and whatever, and as a way to make it fruitful for the year. All right, so this is just a pagan ritual. God's saying, don't do that. I'm your supply, right? But as it stands today, you still can't get a cheeseburger in a kosher restaurant. So, verse 20, behold, I send an angel before you to keep you in the way and to bring you into the place which I have prepared. Beware of him, capital H probably in your translation. Beware of him and obey his voice. Do not provoke him, for he will not pardon your transgressions, for my name is in him. But if you indeed obey his voice and do all that I speak, then I will be an enemy to your enemies and an adversary to your adversaries. For my angel will go before you and bring you into the Amorites and the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, and I will cut them off. They're not even supposed to go into Canaan for at least a year, and then we know it's going to get delayed. But here God starts to prepare them for that time when they go into the promised land. And he said, I'll fight your enemies for you. I'll drive them out of the land, right? And he says, I will send my leader to you. It's described here as my angel, capital A. This is nothing less than an appearance of Jesus in the Old Testament that we'll read of when we get to Joshua chapter 5. And before they attack their first city, which is Jericho, Joshua has an encounter with the commander of the armies of the Lord. And he says, take off your shoes, you're on holy ground. It's an appearance of Jesus. Jesus is going to be leading them. Jesus is going to drive out their enemies in the promised land. So exciting stuff we get to read of in the book of Joshua. Verse 24, you shall not bow down to their gods, the Canaanite gods, nor serve them, nor do according to their works, but you shall utterly overthrow them and completely break down their sacred pillars. You shall serve the Lord your God, and he will bless your bread and his water, and I will take sickness away from the midst of you. No one shall suffer miscarriage or be barren in your land. I will fulfill the number of your days. So God promises Israel material and physical blessings and health for their obedience, right? God says, if you obey, I will bless. Now, how should we take that today? Well, listen, there's a difference here between the old covenant under Moses and the new covenant in Jesus. In the new covenant, we were blessed not according to our obedience, but according to Christ's obedience. They were blessed on obedience. We receive our blessings because of grace. Because Jesus has done the work for us to be blessed, made us worthy to be blessed. And not only that, there's another difference, and that is they received material and physical blessings, and Ephesians chapter 1 says we receive spiritual blessings. Ephesians 1:3, Paul says, blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who has blessed us with every spiritual blessing in heavenly places in Christ. Spiritual blessings in Jesus. A greater blessing, a higher blessing in the new covenant. All right, verse 27. I will send my fear before you. I will cause confusion among all the people to whom you come, and will make all your enemies turn their backs to you. And I will send hornets before you, which shall drive out the Hivite, the Canaanite, and the Hittite from before you. I will not drive them out from before you in 1 year, lest the land become desolate and the beasts of the field become too numerous for you. Little by little I will drive them out from before you until you have increased and you inherit the land. This is interesting. God says, I'm going to do it. I'm going to drive them out. He would use hornets. We'll read of that later on. But the conquering of the land, God says, it's going to take you time. I'm not going to give you the whole land at once. It's too much for you, right? And I think there's a principle here that God often works in a way so that we can grow into the responsibilities and the blessings he has for our lives. Do you know, if you ever look at the statistics on lottery winners almost always end up in horrible condition over a number of years after they win the jackpot. Why? Well, one reason is they're just not ready to manage that much money, and it destroys them. People want it. They have conflicts with family. I mean, it's just a mess. They don't, tax issues and all these entanglements, right? So in a sense, that's kind of what God is doing here. He's preventing that. He's not going to let them just win the Canaanite lottery, the Canaan lottery, and have all the land at one time. They need to grow. They need to grow in number. They need to grow in administration so that they can enjoy the blessings that God has for them. Because guess what? Blessings require, they come with responsibility to manage those things well, to honor the Lord. And so he says, I'm going to do it little by little. It's the same for us. You know, God often just brings his blessings a little bit at a time so that we're maturing and we're growing. And so we shouldn't get frustrated and say like, God, I need to have it all right now. Or solve all my problems right now, right? He's saving us from the whole lottery experience. He's giving us time to mature and to grow so that we can truly enjoy the blessings that he provides. All right, verse 31. He says, and I will set your bounds from the Red Sea to the Sea Philistia and from the desert to the river. For I will deliver the inhabitants of the land into your hand, and you shall drive them out before you. This little description here of the land that Israel would inherit, this is an enormous expanse of territory. This is essentially from the border of Egypt, if you know your Middle Eastern geography here, from the border of Egypt all the way into what we think of as Israel and Gaza and all of that, all the way to the Euphrates River, right? All the way. Under David and Solomon, at one time, Israel probably controlled most of this territory. But they're just for a fleeting few years. But God said, I will give all of this to you if you will follow me and obey me. This is the blessing. This is what I've provided for you. But they would have to walk in obedience to see it out. Now listen, I said that our spiritual blessings are based on the work of Jesus, right? The work of Jesus and what he's provided for us. But there is still a sense in which God wants us to grow and to mature, right? He wants us to be obedient. And sometimes the things that he's provided for us in our life, we don't enjoy the blessing. And I'm not talking about material things. I'm talking about peace. I'm talking about opportunities for service. I'm talking about the real blessings of life that God has. Sometimes we don't enjoy all of them because we're not willing to walk by faith and obedience to him. Right? There is a sense in which the fullness of the blessings of God come as we take steps of faith and trust him. Right? You can be a believer, and yet you can still be dogged by sins that hang on to your life. And the issue is not that God is not powerful enough to deliver you from those sins or those addictions or those patterns of living or whatever. It's that he wants us to walk by faith and be in obedience to him, right? And so the fullness of God's blessings, like we can have eternal life, we're saved, but the fullness of God's blessings, he wants us to grow in maturity and to walk by faith and to trust him as he blesses our life with those things. So verse 32, now he says, you shall make no covenant with them, that is the people of Canaan, nor with their gods, no peace treaties. God's sending them in to take over the land completely. They shall not dwell in your land lest they make you sin against me, for if you serve their gods, it will surely be a snare to you. God's just warning them, I have good things for you, but don't compromise. Don't compromise. We know that as believers. And there's no more miserable place to be as a Christian than to try to have one foot in with Jesus and one foot into your old life. right? That compromise always brings us trouble and stress. The solution is just to put both feet in with Jesus and just to go all the way with him. All right. We are going to celebrate communion this morning, as we always do on the first Sunday of the month. And so we're going to save chapter 24 for next week. Beth, would you come forward, and if the ushers would get the communion elements and begin to serve them. We're going to worship together while the elements are served. And you can stay seated, and when the elements are served, we'll just hold on to them, and then we'll stand together and pray together and worship the Lord.